Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
I am Dieuwke-Jean, and I am a fine artist, an indigenous artist that focuses on post-colonial narratives. Sorry, ek probeer. En nou ja, tongue twister nou af. Okay. Hello, I am Dieuwke-Jean. I am a visual artist, an indigenous artist that focuses on post-colonial narratives. I am a proud Khoi descendant, and my work focuses mainly on the marginalization and also the female history of South Africa.
Krotoa, also known as Eva, was a young Khoi woman who played a significant and complex role in early South African history during the Dutch colonial period. Taken in as a slave or servant in the household of Jan van Riebeeck, the first Dutch commander at the Cape, Krotoa served as a translator and cultural mediator between the Dutch settlers and the indigenous Khoi people. Fluent in both Dutch and Khoi languages, she became a vital link in early negotiations and trade. However, her life was marked by cultural conflict, personal hardship, and eventual rejection by both societies, reflecting the deep tensions of colonialism and identity in 17th century South Africa. Dieuwke-Jean is an artist who has recently reimagined Krotoa and depicted the young Khoi woman in her artwork. We traveled to Paarl in South Africa to find out more.
My work, my paintings and my drawings mostly focus on historical art, but also on focusing on indigenous women, the role that they played, looking at hidden histories, hidden biographies, women that were kind of names went lost in the archives along the centuries. So I just go and basically take them from these, those were hidden or buried, and I give them a new voice or a new platform and reintroduce them to a contemporary world, contemporary society, just showcasing what was once lost. I basically have a passion for history, and I've always been fascinated by past stories, but I've always found that there was a lack of the female perspective. When it comes to looking at our country's history, you always hear the male perspective. It was a male-dominated history, especially if you look at colonization. But you never or seldom often hear from women or the perspective of basically what it was like for a female back in, for example, the 16 or 1700s. So for me, it's just through my art showcasing or imagining what it could have been or what it could have been like from a woman's perspective. And that is what I try to showcase through my art.
As recently as yesterday, you gave a speech. Just tell us about that event and why you were invited to talk about your paintings.
So I was invited by the mayor of the Cape Winelands, Alderman Elna van Schlicht, to act as a guest speaker at a Phenomenal Woman Awards ceremony. So what it does is it commemorates women that are key players in the community of Paarl and the Paarl region, the Cape Winelands region. So this ranges from community work to education. There are different categories, and I was awarded the mayoral award last year, and so I was just invited yesterday to come and share my journey, share my work and what I do and why I do what I do, and which was an honor for me to share a little bit of my journey and why I am so inspired by our women, and especially in our region as well, because we seldom forget that there are also some key players, especially in women in our history, that also played a role in shaping our country's history and telling our story.
So one of the women that you drew in one of your paintings is Krotoa. So tell us about the reimagination of Krotoa and why this is important, especially to this town and to the Western Cape at large.
So Krotoa, she is basically the first indigenous woman that we hear in Southern African history, I can say. So she was an interpreter, a key negotiator with the arrival of the Dutch in 1652. So she was taken in as a young girl at the age of 10 or 11 by Jan van der Riebeeck and his wife Maria at the fort. So when they settled here, she basically was taken from her family, taken in to be taught the Dutch language. So in order for them to be able to communicate with the indigenous Khoi groups, so that they could trade and barter with them. So of course they couldn't speak the language. They needed to get someone who could learn the Dutch language, and she was she was one of 4 interpreters, the only female of them. So she was basically raised in an environment where she had to kind of set her Khoi customs aside and then adopt a Dutch or a European lifestyle. She had to learn how to speak like the Dutch, she had to walk like them, talk like them, act like them. So she is a big key role player, especially in our local history, in our local community. There is no known image of her. So whereas, for example, for the Van der Riebeecks, there are paintings that were commissioned at the time. They sat for the portraits, they had artists who painted them. With her and other indigenous role players or figures, there aren't sketches or drawings that were made of her. Yes, they were travelers and those who came from Europe who came to visit the Cape, but none of them, unfortunately, were artists who made sketches of her. So we only have vague descriptions of her, but there's no image or likeness of her. So for me as an artist, I felt that in order for me to not only tell her story or showcase her story, I knew that there had to be an image that had to be connected to her face, which in this case there weren't any faces. So I felt to kind of reference the descriptions and create my own interpretation of what she might have looked like. It is a big job, it is a big task, because I have no idea what she looked like. I wasn't there. However, there are descriptions of others who saw her, and they wrote about her in their travel journals. There was a Frenchman, there's a Dutchman, there was also a person who came from Sweden who visited the Cape, and they wrote about her. So for me, as an artist, I'm not just basically someone who paints. I see myself as a storyteller, and the only way that I can depict their stories is through paint, and it's through pencil. And that's how I felt to kind of give more a sense of humanity by providing a face to her name.
So what then do we say about the image? When somebody speaks about Krotoa, there's this image that comes up in my mind, having read books over the years about Krotoa. So there's an image that is connected with her. Who is that?
So my mother, Heibri van Niekerk, she basically made a discovery in 2022 while she was doing research on another woman. So we were looking for photographs of a woman called Khoi. So she was basically an interviewee by the Bleek and Lloyd family, who did they created an intensive collection on San folklore, the language and custom, the Tram language. And I basically created a portrait of one of these people that were interviewed. But then while I was looking for her image, I was looking for a high resolution image, because if you print it in books, the quality will always go bad in terms of publishing and republishing. So I asked my mom to look for an image, if it's possible, maybe in an archive somewhere, because she is the researcher. I'm still learning. I feel like I'm under her apprenticeship. And while she was looking for the images, she came across Samuel Baylis Barnard, who was a photographer who had a studio in Adelaide Street in Cape Town. And he was the one who was basically commissioned by the Bleek and Lloyds to come and take pictures of those they interviewed for their collection. And there was a little girl whose image is now being used as the image of Krotoa, which you now know as the black and white photograph, this girl with the scarf. But she was actually a Korana girl, was part of a family that was also basically invited or sent for to come to the farm in Mowbray to come and do the interviews. And somehow, later on, I think it was P.W. Laitler who wrote a book about Cape Town, the governors of Cape Town. I'm not 100% sure what's the title of the book now, but he used the image first. It was at the South African Library, which is now the Iziko Museum, and he kind of connected. Maybe he saw the photograph of this girl and felt that it fits the description of Krotoa. You know, Krotoa who went into the family of the Van Riebeeks. She was there, basically a servant. You know, she was working for them, who did little chores for them while she was learning the language. And he kind of felt maybe that this image suits her, this little girl who wears a scarf, kind of a domestic servant. And he took that image first and published it under the description Eva, which was Krotoa's Christian name, her Dutch name. And that was how the image first circulated and came connected with that of Krotoa. And it wasn't until an author named Trudy Bloom published her fictional novel named Krotoa Eva, Woman of Robben Island, where she used it on the front cover, and then in her credits on the inside, on the second page, she says it was a cover painting. So I think that when that book was published in 1999, that was where the community and where everyone kind of assumed that this is the image, the official image of Krotoa. And that was how it was republished and used in museums and websites everywhere. But my mother made the discovery that it wasn't Krotoa. It was a photograph of a little girl with her own name, her own identity. It was taken in the 1870s, and she has her own story. But unfortunately, the image already was taken into the popular culture. It was already accepted by the community to be that of Krotoa.
Well, just looking at the time of publishing 1999, this is the internet era, basically just getting steam, and one would understand why everybody associates that image with that of Krotoa. But tell us, while you were preparing now to do this artwork, the description of Krotoa is very interesting. I think it's amazing. So you spoke about the Frenchman who wrote about Krotoa and other writers also. So what did you pick up? How did they describe Krotoa or Eva? And how did it lead to you putting together this new reimagined version of Krotoa, which I hope will be used for the future, going forward? And then as a second question, tell us about the young girl who it actually is. So two questions.
Yes. So, of course, we have descriptions of, for example, the commanders that she worked for. Jan van Riebeek wrote about her in his official journal. Thereafter him, the commanders that succeeded him also wrote about her. But that was more kind of, I guess you could say, attributes, skills. She could speak Dutch fluently. She was good in her work. She was very diligent. She was a fast learner. But it wasn't until, like I said, the travelers that came. So those who basically went on the journeys from Europe to the east, they had to stop over at the Cape of Good Hope. That was kind of like the refreshment station. So if the ship needed repairs, if they needed to replenish food, or they had sick on board, they need to tend to the sick, they will stop at the Cape. But the first stop would be the fort, because you had to stop at the fort. That was basically kind of the headquarters of the Cape at the time. So Krotoa was basically living with the Van Riebeeks at the fort. So obviously they met this girl and they saw this girl. So the first person who wrote about her is Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. So he is a French traveler who also published his travels to the east. And he wrote a lot about Asia and China. But he wrote about his time at the Cape as well. And he wrote about this little girl who was named Krotoa, who was taken in by the parents. This is now how he heard the story from Van Riebeek. And then he said, this girl who's white, bright-eyed, had a somewhat flat nose, but she worked for the Van Riebeeks. She was raised by them and could speak the Dutch language fluently. And then you have another person named Johan Nieuwhof, who also in 1654 also was stopped over and talked about the Khoi people in general. He wrote their customs, their descriptions, basically spoke about them as if they were describing, I guess you could say, the rest of the wildlife there. It was very derogatory, it was very degrading. However, he spoke about Ava, who again, he said she could have passed as a European woman. So already you have these descriptions, you already have a vague idea that she was very light-skinned, she looked different than her fellow people at the Cape at the time. And I mean, there are a few historians who kind of speculate that she might have had a European father, because we know nothing about her father. We know about her mother, who was part of the Khoi, also affiliated with Krotoa, was taken into the Khoi, but she was Khoi Kona. And her uncle, Harry, or Ochimatu, was basically also known as Harry the Strandloper, but he was the first translator to Van Riebeeck. And I think that was how he kind of introduced Krotoa into the Van Riebeeck household. So again, you kind of wonder, you kind of assume, what could her father have looked like? Why was she so light-skinned compared to the others who were described as having a little bit of a kind of a darker, pale yellow or brown skin tones? But then again, these are their interpretations. And already you will have an image, and then you kind of think, okay, but what could she have looked like? When you look, it's vague, but as soon as you put the pieces together, you kind of create an image and you shape your image around what was kind of written in between the lines. Later on, you have Jan Pieters Kortemundi, who met her late in her adult life. Now, this is now after she was banished to Robben Island. The reason being she fell into alcoholism, and she was banished for kind of indecent behavior or bad behavior. Her children was taken away from her. This is now after Van Riebeeck left. So she kind of fell in between these two worlds, where the Dutch couldn't accept her because she was Khoi, and the Khoi saw kind of the threat that she was kind of living with the European people. She was this in between. Many view her as a traitor as well, because it's almost like she kind of led to the downfall of the Khoi, the fact that the Europeans learned or gathered information from the Khoi from her, etc., etc. So unfortunately, she was caught up in this world, and she couldn't fit in between the two. She was the first indigenous woman to be baptized as a Christian in 1662, but she was also the first indigenous woman to marry a European in 1664. So she basically, that's why a lot of people refer to her as the mother of the nation, because her children were the first mixed race between Khoi and European. So a lot of firsts, but I mean, unfortunately, with those firsts, you kind of get the blame also for a lot of things, unfortunately. And unfortunately, Krotoa was her only way to cope with this inequality, this discrimination, this kind of, being the scapegoat, was alcohol. Europeans introduced alcohol, and for her, that was kind of like her coping mechanism. But unfortunately, it also led to her downfall, and she was banished to Robben Island after she had an outfall with the commander at the governor's table, etc. And then there, Jan Pieters Kortemundi met her and spoke with her and spoke of this, amazing woman who could speak Dutch, Portuguese, a little bit of French and English. She knew her scriptures so well. She could speak with the traveling priest that was with them. She could speak with him on a level she could recite passages from the Bible. And he's mentioned and described her as a masterpiece of nature. So already, you read about these things about her. There are these labels. But then when you look deeper, you realize how she was written. There's other views, there were other opinions on her as well. So for me as an artist, I have to bring all of those perspectives into mind when it comes to creating an image. I can't just rely on what was written in history books. I have to look a bit further and go read deeper and kind of read between the lines. And that is how I felt, to kind of restore her dignity, to restore that, sense of humanity, and not her just being labeled as a drunk or a whore or a vixen or whatever the case may be. She was also this wonderful woman who could speak multiple languages. She was a negotiator. She was a peacemaker. She was responsible for establishing the first peace peace negotiations between the Khoi and the Dutch during the first Khoi-Dutch War, which broke out in 1658, 1659. So she was much more than just the labels that we often hear and read about her, and that is what I wanted to
Sounds like such good work, and we sincerely hope that going forward, Krotoa will have a new face. And I think since 1999 to 2025, it was a slow start to the internet, but now everything is so much more instant, and we hope that it will be a quick change, and that this one will be more accurate. So we didn't talk about the original girl who it is. So I think her story is also important. I wouldn't like for us to exclude her out of this conversation. What do we know about who that painting actually is?
So the photograph, I think what we do know, we do have a surname at least, because we know this little family, it was one family. The other those who were interviewed were Kham, so it was one tribe or one clan. But this specific family came from a Kurana or Kora clan, which was a different language, a different dialect. So fortunately, we have an idea of who it could be, but I think my mother still has to dive deeper to kind of confirm whether it is this family. I think she is going to do research. Hopefully, I think September, she will go to Kimberley to kind of interview all the families, possible descendants of those families, kind of get to the strings. I mean, you have to get to the loose strings to kind of see where it connects to. Hopefully, there's a ball of yarn at the end.
What is the surname?
Links. We're not sure if it's Lynx, because back in the day, Lynx was also a name given to a caracal cat, Lynx, or it could be Lynx, those who were left-handed. Back in the day, if they were left-handed, someone called you Lynx. That was just how it was. Unfortunately, they will give you a name or a description based on, but that's just how the colonial powers that be named you or nicknamed you. But hopefully, we can pinpoint. There are names. We just aren't sure if it's mother or daughter or older sister and a younger sibling. But we are getting. Hopefully, my mom will get to the bottom of that.
I think your mom is doing amazing work, and this is so important. So, in closing, what do you wish to convey through your artwork, the subjects that you choose, the influence to your art that your mom is clearly bringing? But for you, for Dieuwke, Linee, what is it that you wish to convey? What is the message? What is it that you want to say with your art?
The thing with my art, number one, is the fact that there are so much of our history that we still don't know about. It is there, it's in the archives. And like you said earlier, with the advent of internet access, and now we can access online archives, we can access information that was previously closed down to our community, to researchers who could not have access due to the Group Areas Act. You couldn't go to the archives as easily today than you could back then. So we are fortunate to have access to online. You can access open domain, public domain, journals, documents, letters. You can basically just type in what you want and it is there for you. It's accessible. It's just merely the case of us going through it, taking the time to kind of research and read through everything and take that narrative that was hidden to us and present it to a new audience in a new light. So for me, it is, I guess, the whole process of decolonization. I know it's very messy, it's tricky, because once you bring one story to light, unfortunately another story will have to be placed aside. But hopefully what I try to do with my art is to bring both sides, both the European and both the indigenous narratives, and showcase them through my art, which is not easy. It's not easy at all. However, I do want to have people look at my art and kind of say, but wow, I never looked at it like that. You know, this is what I was taught at school. This is how I see it. This is the image that I have. But here I come and I present a different image to you. I give you information that paints a different picture. And hopefully when people look at my art, because my art focuses a lot on post-colonial narratives, it deals with marginalization, especially of women and how women were treated. For example, Krotoa in particular. I would like to give it in a updated and a new form. I was fortunate enough to speak with Professor Nigel Penn a while ago, and I remember when I spoke to him, I said, our textbooks, our history books, have illustrations and paintings that were made by white artists or colonial artists hundreds of years ago. So what I hope to achieve is basically, with the new information, with the new updated history books, that there will be updated images as well, hopefully. So my dream is basically to create historically accurate images that could go with the narratives, with the new information that gets exposed or uncovered. That's basically my goal, my dream one day to achieve that.
It's an amazing dream to have. Dieuwke-Jean is an award-winning artist from the town of Paarl. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much again for having me.
For more on the rights of Indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on SoundCloud, Spotify, Facebook, and X.
Wandugu wapenzi, tumekusanyika hapa kuimba nyimbo za kusifia Tanzania.